beautiful audience. Welcome to the 2020 series presented by New York Film Academy. I am Liz Hinlein, creative director and filmmaker. And the 2020 series is a series of speaker conversations with creative visionaries that I just think are the bomb and that I learned so much from. And today I have one of my best friends, amazing, brilliant cinematographer, Anka Malatynska. She's been named by American Cinematographer magazine as one of the top rising stars in cinematography. I could not be more proud to present you guys to Anka. Greetings, Anka.
Hi, everyone. So nice to be here. So great to see you, Liz. Thank you for having me.
It's so great. And so Anka is talking to us from Nicaragua, which we are all so excited and yet jealous of. And I know Anka's traveled around the world. She's shot around the world. How has that inspired you creatively? And what have you learned as a DP by shooting in different parts of the globe?
Well, you know, first of all, I would say that really, like you said, like I am a global citizen. I was born in Poland. My family came to the United States when I was young, but I was also, you know, whether in my soul or genetically, I've had this huge wanderlust embedded in me. And really, you know, I was attracted to filmmaking because filmmaking is an extension of that wanderlust. Filmmaking is always a journey. Every story is a journey. Every TV show is a journey. Every commercial, everything that we do, you know, we're like a wild traveling circus that's creating, you know, these beautiful artistic human storytelling experiences. You know, in the way that travel has influenced me, I've always had a really deep curiosity about human nature, about how people live all over the world. And really, it was the camera that gave me the ability to kind of infiltrate and see, understand, and tell stories that I otherwise wouldn't be privy to, you know, and that very much started in the documentary arena for me. And then somehow, you know, the technical and the craft aspects of cinematography really took a hold of my mind and soul. And then the narrative cinematography, telling stories through light, it's like having the ability to translate what happens in a human soul through a picture. So it's another level of travel for me in a way.
And you do that so beautifully. All your work is just so evocative and gorgeous. Do you find that when you are on set, do you rely, I mean, I see it as a three-pronged approach. It's creativity, craft, and collaboration. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on all three of them and how do you make them work for you, you know, when you're on set, any part of the world?
Well, you know, number one, I think that craft is the language and the languaging that we need to communicate our creativity. You know, and cinematography, it's this interesting art that's really, it's really on the intersection of magic and logic. We are actively using our intuition, our life experiences to be able to translate and photograph other people's experiences. But we can't do that if the fundamentals of the craft aren't there. You know, when we talked about, you asked me about working internationally, and you know, there is an international language of film, and it is the craft, you know, and like I said in our earlier conversations, a 10K is a 10K, whether I'm in Thailand or whether I'm in LA or whether I'm in New York, you know. So working with the tools of cinematography is a way for us to internalize that craft. And once we've internalized the craft, and it becomes almost second nature, just like forming a sentence in the English language. We don't have to break it down. We don't have to think about it. It's an intuitive process. But if you were learning English as a second language, you would have to learn the fundamentals of the grammar. It's the same thing. It's a visual language. It has fundamentals of grammar. And then the tools that we use for that language, you know, also have you know, they exist in a logical space. They exist in a technical space. And we need to know what the tools are capable of in order to translate what's in our imagination. And especially as a cinematographer, that's our role. You know, the director can have a vision and they may not know exactly how to translate that vision. And that's what's really exciting for me about being a cinematographer and about cinematography. You know, I feel like it's being a magician. You know, I listen to people's ideas, I read words on a page, and then I'm actually that final gatekeeper of the image that's being recorded, that translates that idea, that evokes that mood, that tells the story of that person, place, or thing.
Oh, that's amazing. I totally understand. And what was like, can you remember the first film or something that made you fall in love with cinematography specifically?
You know, there's two films that really, at different points in time, really kind of set me on the road to being a filmmaker. And the first one is Out of Africa. You know, and it's an older film. It's a beautiful film. And for me, Out of Africa was a journey to Africa, that I could have that experience of Africa, and then the experience of the love story in that movie, and the love story that really looked at love from two different angles, you know, commitment versus freedom, allowing somebody to be fully themselves versus wanting to covet their love for yourself, all set against an epic landscape. You know, my inspiration, again, it's travel, it's the world, it's human experience. Ever since I can remember, my first memory was, how do I get to see this entire planet? And Out of Africa took me on this journey. The second movie for me that, you know, cinematography wise was a huge influence is Slumdog Millionaire, which is a movie that came much later. I love that type of storytelling. I love storytelling that allows us to look at very difficult things, but also allows us to then exit the movie theater or the viewing experience and have some sort of hope for humanity. And I think the lighting, the camera angles, Anthony Mantle's work, and his embrace of new technology has always been really exciting to me. You know, I am excited about the future of cinematography. I'm excited about the developments. You know, I'm not looking back to a world and a time when things were better and different, because really the grass is always greener on the other side of the hill. But this time that we're in right now, you know, the innovations in lighting, how quickly we're able to move, how we're able to use LED lights, it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing to me, you know, the advances that have happened even in the past 5 years. But, you know, and again, I'm going to go back to this idea of how important craft is and the basics of the craft, because really, you know, somebody can say, but if the technology is changing all the time, how do you keep up with it? And really, once you know the basics really well, and the basics have been internalized, you can translate those basics to any other kind of technical space. And for me, you know, for those of you who are young cinematographers out there listening, my fundamental text for understanding exposure is still Ansel Adams' The Negative, which is a book that's, you know, probably close to 100 years old, you know, comes from the beginning of photography. And it's really, so get it, read it, learn how to view the world through a black and white zone system inside your head. And then you can translate that zone system to any camera, any situation, and you can start to utilize exposure as art instead of exposure as quote unquote the correct exposure that on automatic settings your camera will tell you to do.
That is such a great, I'm so happy you suggested that. I remember Anka and I went to AFI as DPs together, and I made a photocopy of the zone system, put it on my light meter. So I would have that, always looking at that, so you could really look at the world, and then you can make creative choices. So how do you, now that you're really working into the big league of TV and Hollywood and all that, how do you balance craft, creativity, and collaboration?
Well, you know, I feel like, again, to really emerge as an artist, you have to get to a point where the craft is internalized in your subconscious mind. And then you can be free to create, you know, and I remember the last show that I did, actually, somebody came to me and they said, you know, when you're on set, it just looks like you're in pure joy and pure creativity. And there is an element in my work and in how I work that when I'm on set, when I'm doing what I've been educated, trained, and have done for years, it is pure joy. Even when it's stress, it's a joy, it's creativity. But that's because the technical aspects of cinematography at this point are really, really intuitive. And that's part of, you know, again, internalizing the craft. How do you internalize the craft? You shoot, you shoot, you shoot, you shoot anything you can get your hands on. You experiment, you make up stupid rules for your movies. Like, I'm only gonna use one lens, and, you know, and maybe they're not stupid rules, but I also have this thing that, you know, we have to be careful of the rules that we make, especially in independent low budget filmmaking. And we have to be cognizant that the rules that we've made can actually translate within the budget that we have. You know, in a concrete example of that, I always talk about my AFI thesis, and I shot my AFI thesis the year that Children of Men came out, and it was shot on a wide angle lens. And I said, oh, I'm going to shoot my thesis completely on a wide angle lens. But the thing that I was lacking was that superb production design. We just did not have that production design. And trying to force that idea, you know, and in a way, I failed. To me, I failed at my thesis because I kept forcing that idea without being cognizant to what's actually happening in front of me, you know, which leads me to, you were asking about collaboration. And now collaboration, you know, being a cinematographer is about being a superb collaborator. Like one of my mentors, Vilma Sigmund, said, we are all kind of like painters, but we're painters whose hand is being held, whose paintbrush and hand while we're painting, it's being held by many different people, by the producers, by the showrunner, by the director. You know, and what really helps me, and what's helped me over the years in contextualizing how to be a great collaborator, is I do something now that I call deep listening, and I deeply listen to all of my collaborators. I really watch the edges of my ego and the need to speak, to just be heard, or for somebody to think I'm smart when I'm in a collaborative group process and prep. I really try to listen beyond the words that people are saying, you know, whether it's the showrunner, you know, giving an idea at the table, and then I see the producer recoiling in fear of how much that's going to cost, you know, and both of those things are informing me, and they're actually informing me of what the project needs. The other philosophy that I really bring into my shooting is this idea that any group vision, any group collaboration has a life of its own once it's been initiated. It's not about just how I want the movie to look or how I want the show to look. It's not even about how the director or the showrunner or the writer or the producer, you know, there's always a head visionary. And I feel like their vision has to be listened to in the hierarchy of filmmaking. But that project will also, through basically filming, it'll tell us what it needs, you know. And an example, a concrete example of that is, you know, like I heard an interview with the producer of The Favorite, and she talked about how there was a scene that the director really wanted, a cockfighting scene in the movie, but it was illegal to film in the United States. It was illegal to film in England. And it almost became like this unsurmountable obstacle where the director was going to lose it and everybody was going to go crazy because we can't have it exactly the way we want it, even though we have the money, the time, the resources, you know. And often to me, those things that we can't have exactly the way we want, it is the project that is speaking to us, that is telling us what is like in the higher interest of the project. And they rewrote the scene as a duck race. And I guess during their Oscar run, it became one of the favorite scenes of many audience members. And, you know, and I think every production I've been a part of, there's been a moment, we lost our location, it's too cold to shoot outside with a child, what are we gonna do? Are we gonna hold on to our vision no matter what, or are we gonna listen to the project and what the project needs?
Oh, yes, exactly. And that's what makes you such a masterful filmmaker, cinematographer. You talked a bunch about, or you've mentioned having mentors and mentorship. And I would love to hear your how you created these relationships with people, and how did that affect you, your career, your confidence?
Well, you know, I think, again, you know, this is where cinematography kind of aligns itself under the idea of a craft and not just an art. And a craft you learn, you know, from passed from master to student through apprenticeship. You need to be around the tools. You need to use the tools. You need to watch people who have more experience than you using the tools to, again, internalize the craft. My mentors are key to my career. You know, and the way that I got my first mentorship was actually, for those of you out there listening in the United States, the Academy of Television Arts and Science internship program is incredible. You can apply for it before graduation. You can apply for it within a year of after graduating. And that was my entrance into Hollywood. I applied after graduating from NYU, and I got into the Academy of Television Arts and Science internship. And I was very lucky to be paired with James Chrysanthus, who's an ASD cinematographer who was shooting television in Los Angeles at the time. And when I first got to LA, I drove cross country from New York City in my little white Dodge Neon, and I drove straight onto the Warner Brothers lot, where I became an apprentice to Jim Chrysanthus. One of the first things that he had me do was he had me go around all the stages and record all of his lighting plots. And I was like, oh, this is a really important job. I'm gonna be very meticulous about it. And, you know, and I took all the layouts of the stages and took notes of everything, and I brought it to him, and he said, great, that's yours to keep. So now you know how to light a psych. Now you know how to light on a stage. Now you have these records. And it's funny because it's what I do with all of the students who come and apprentice or shadow with me. I'm like, you're gonna do a really important job. You're gonna take all my lighting notes for me. And then you're gonna and then I have them actually translate the notes into a document. And then I'm like, great, now you know how to light, you know, night exteriors. Now you know how to have the recipe for what it is that we did. So, you know, mentorship is everything. And through Jim was mentored by Laszlo Kovacs and Vilma Sigmund, two seminary cinematographers that really changed the face of American cinema in the 1970s. Vilma Sigmund shot Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I mean, they've really been responsible for how we imagine a lot of the way we imagine the world through the lens of a film. When I graduated from AFI, Jim had me shoot his directorial debut, which was a documentary about Laszlo Kovacs and Vilma Sigmund. And I got to sit in a room and shoot interviews with, you know, some of the top cinematographers at the time, not to mention spending that time with Laszlo and Vilmas. And it's an incredible learning experience. Where mentors come into play also is, you know, it's having the ability to text someone who has more technical expertise than you. Okay, I just got to my location, it's 5 o'clock in the morning, and the producer just told me that all of the plans that I made to light from above, we can't do, and we're shooting a party. What am I gonna do? I am out of ideas. I'm freaking out. I'm gonna text one of my mentors. This really happened. Texted Jim, 5 o'clock in the morning. He was somewhere in the world, and said, put the light units on the floor and hide them with the extras. Exactly what I did. It worked brilliantly. So it's kind of, you know, it's walking into the unknown, having the ability to problem solve these things. And sometimes problem solving doesn't mean that, oh, I'm going to come up with a magical solution myself. Again, it's about collaboration, communication, having the people to ask the questions, you know, and just like my mentors mentored me, you know, I've been very much dedicated to mentoring the next generation, both for humanitarian reasons and for selfish reasons. What I've learned is the more I share and teach, the more I become a master, because not only is the craft intuitive for me now, it is also, I can speak it, I can name it, I can teach it, and therein I rise to another level of mastership.
Exactly. That's so beautiful. And that's, and one of the keys, we're going to go to some of the questions here, but one of the questions was, I'm paraphrasing, do I need a degree in cinematography or stuff like that? And I will start with it. No, you don't need a degree, but you do need to work in the crew, and you need to get around the languaging of, if you want to be a cinematographer, get around the languaging of cinematography, be a camera PA. You just can't read a book, look at Vimeos online, and then go out and learn. There's subtleties, not just knowing the craft, but also understanding how to communicate, like Anka does so beautifully, with people, and what she's been hitting on with the collaboration. And so what do you think about education versus real world knowledge?
Well, you know, I have to say that I both know and respect some incredible cinematographers who have had no formal education, who basically came up the apprenticeship ladder. I do think it is a harder path. You have to be incredibly self-motivated, and not only for the apprenticeship at the technical level, but you have to be willing to educate yourself as an artist, you know, and as an artist that's a bookworm, a consumer, a massive consumer of film and media, and that you educate yourself in the history of cinema. Because what happens at the higher level productions is that, you know, kind of no matter how dumbed down the subject matter of whatever we're making may be, you know, what I always find is the people involved in making it, you know, we are using high level references. We are talking about the history of film. We are talking about art history. We are talking about the history of photography, you know, and you have to know that history. You have to look at painters, paintings. So yes, you can totally become a cinematographer through apprenticeship, through working on set, you know, through getting together with a cinematographer and saying, I will bring you coffee for the rest of your life if I can just see you on set. And it may be silly, but, you know, again, being a really kind human being that's willing to be of service actually gets you further in the film industry than anything else, especially in the United States.
Agreed very much. So from Oliver Chow, working in natural environments, if the weather lighting is not what you expect, how do you cope? Do you just wait it out, or what do you do to react and adapt?
Well, the last feature that I shot, Breaking Fast, we actually had the situation where we had 3 nights of night exteriors of a walk and talk between 2 characters. And those 3 nights, it started, there was a torrential downpour in LA. You know, no other time, just over those 3 nights that we had in our extremely tight shooting schedule. We talked about, as a group with the producers, about what would it look like if we were to push, cancel, you know, work around the rain with our schedule. We decided to actually keep pushing through and to embrace the rain. And actually there were places where the writer director had to write in picking up an umbrella at the store so that the continuity of the story would make sense. You know, so again, we're thinking on our feet, the project is alive, it's telling us what it needs. The outcome is that we got a beautiful wet down from the rain, and the photography was much more spectacular because we had that rain. It was cold, it was uncomfortable, we moved much slower, but we leaned into the unknown of an uncontrollable situation, and and we decided to adapt and walked forward. And I would say that 99% of the time, that's the best way to proceed. You know, in terms of outdoors and weather, a lot of independent filmmakers also talk about having a cover set. So having something floating in your schedule and having some sort of a cover set that if you are really faced with, you know, with natural conditions, say now there's a hurricane, but your schedule and your budget, you know, can we do that green screen work inside the garage that was MOS? Is there something that's a part of your movie that can basically be a moving cover set? But 99% of the time, embrace it, go with it. And in my experience, 99.9% of the time, it only elevates the movie. Again, this is the project telling you through ephemeral means what it needs.
God's talking down to the producer. Exactly.
Yeah.
Next question. Does the cinematographer, when we've been talking, deal with the color correction, and how involved do you get with that?
Yes, the cinematographer is an integral part of color correction, you know, although now a lot of the time, most of the time, cinematographers don't get paid for color correction. If you're invited into color correction, especially on a television series, it's a sign of respect. It's a sign that your vision is respected. You know, there are also times where the cinematographer will be totally ousted out of color correction, you know, for whatever political reasons, schedule reasons, they couldn't be there. But it's really, again, I try to achieve a good portion of my look in camera. That was the way we were educated at AFI. You know, don't just provide a blank slate to post. You already want to push the images to look like what you want them to look like. You know, and of course we do that through LUTs and through viewing through LUTs on set while we're recording log. So really anybody can turn that color into any color later on. But there's already a direction. There's already an imprint, you know, and again, as a collaborator in color correction, like I'm actually engaging and we're trying to figure out a remote workflow for a color correction that I'm doing for a television series. You know, I feel like I've already gave a lot of information to the colorist because of the looks that we were lucky enough to set on set. We had a DIT with live color on set the whole time. And to me, it's really important to trust and empower my collaborators, whether it's the gaffer, whether it's the camera operator, or in this case, it's the colorist. And in this case, you know, with the world shut down, I can't fly back to New York and do this. And there's going to have to be an element of trust that me and this colorist, while I was in New York, we communicated enough, and that the baseline is there. And they're going to translate that. They're going to send it to me for a check. I'll give my input, but after I give my input, the network's going to give their input, the showrunner's going to give their input. So ultimately, I also feel like as a cinematographer, to be happy, to be successful, you have to let go at a certain level. You have to do your part the best that you can. But if you're not invited into that color correction process, okay, great. My imprint, my images are still there. I am moving on to the next project, and that's where I'm going to focus my creativity.
Totally. Don't get your knickers in a bunch about small things like that.
Yeah, and I would say also color correction is not the place to invent the look. You know, again, you want to invent that look on set. You want to record it on set. You want to have your lights balanced in order for that log to take on that look with as few digital artifacts, you know, with the blues not looking dirty or the yellows not looking dirty. But you want to have the conversations about what this is going to look like in pre-production. You want to make those commitments and those choices in pre-production. Color correction is not a place to find the look of your film.
Totally. So we were talking about a little bit the indie film route into TV, and how you were talking about how that's a really successful way, a great training ground for how series are being shot now. Can you talk a little bit more about this, so the indie film to TV, what you've seen that's been successful for DPs, directors, etc.?
Well, okay, so number one, in indie films in general are a lot more hands-on. You know, sometimes you have to be your own gaffer, you have to be your own key grip. You have to handle the gear, you have to get tactile with the gear, and you have to think really economically and fast. You know, a lot of the times, you know, people talk about cinematography, that great cinematography is these massive lighting setups, but really great cinematography is about doing more with less. How little do I have to do? You know, my question is always, I don't want to impact the set with a ton of lights. Can I light really frugally? Either with small instruments on the inside or big instruments on the outside, so I can give the stage to the actors. I can give the stage to that human performance. Because if the story and the performance isn't there, it doesn't matter how beautiful your images are, it's probably not going to be seen. So again, it's about supporting that story. So, you know, in independent film, you have to work fast. You have to learn how to do things without necessarily the gear that you may want, with limited gear. So then actually walking into bigger budget productions where suddenly, you know, there's an excellent gaffer, an excellent key grip, excellent camera operators. And as a DP, you know, you're directing this group of people, but they have their excellence. It's a lot easier in many ways. It's a lot easier if you know how to communicate. And then the other way that independent film prepares you, you know, and again, this goes back to knowing the craft. When you know your gear, when you know the craft, when you know where you want to place that light, you can't be run over by a senior gaffer or a senior key grip telling you, well, that doesn't make sense. And if you put it over there, and you know, you've done all the roles for yourself multiple times. You know what you can get away without doing. And I think, you know, television moves incredibly quickly. I think somewhere there's a world where you have enough time and money. And I remember talking to one of my mentors about it years ago. I said, oh, I can't wait to be where you are, where there's enough time and money to do that. He looked at me and he said, that doesn't exist, Anka. There's never enough time and there's never enough money. And you'll always be asked to do more in a way than what your production can handle. So again, working with limited budgets, working with limited equipment, allowing necessity to be the mother of invention, and allowing yourself to be an inventor prepares you to work quickly and nimbly, you know, even when you have a bigger crew, when you have more equipment, you know, then you can make decisions. Like producers on my last show came to me and said, how can we narrow down this equipment list? You know, and I sat down with the gaffer and we started cutting every other light. You know, what do I really need for the scene? Not what do I maybe need for the scene, or I maybe will want, or something just in case. And in that way, you know, you're able to deliver your vision, and then you're also able to satisfy the needs of the budget.
Exactly, exactly. And going back to a conversation we had earlier in the week, Kyla asked, how do you plan for a shoot? And you had this we had this great conversation about how you beautifully wallpaper your walls and your refrigerator and your coffee cup with images from the project you're going to make and while you're making the project. And I just love to hear more about that.
Well, I feel like, you know, over the past several years, actually being cinematographer has made me into a master compiler of shots from movies and productions all over, you know, and now I have all these archives of still photos from different movies and visual inspirations. And actually, when I start a project, that's the first thing I do, is I start pulling images into a folder. Of what is this going to look like? What inspires us? You know, I'm talking to the director or I'm talking to the showrunner. What do we want this to look like? We identify our visual references, and the thing that I find really helpful is I not only accumulate those references digitally on my computer, I print them out, I plaster them in my office. If I have a prep office, I plaster them on the walls of my apartment, so that, you know, again, I'm really big on this idea of the craft, the process, the visual seeping into our subconscious. And that way we can use our intuition on set to make very quick decisions. Because when I have a collage of what my episode, my movie, my show is going to look like on the wall when I wake up every morning, on another wall where I drink my coffee every morning, and then I go into my office and I'm looking at those similar images, it's almost, you know, it almost becomes natural that you start to replicate and incorporate ideas from those images into what you're doing. So I'm very much about plastering everything with what this show, movie, episode is going to look like, so that I can't avoid but to look at it all the time.
I think that's so brilliant, and it's just to get, and it is, again, going back to mentorship and learning and art and looking, you know, it's a big thing to look at the outside world, look at art, look at things that aren't filmmaking, look at the weather, look at how the light goes across a tree, and so just keep that. So you build that, almost that internal reservoir that you have.
Mm-hmm.
A final question is, what is the most important thing in the relationship between a director and a cinematographer? And there are many important things, but.
From the cinematographer's perspective, you have to respect your director. And sometimes, you know, and especially in TV and in the working world, which is different from the indie world and the student world, where you get to choose your collaborators a lot of the time. You know, when I go to work, sometimes I don't get to choose my collaborators, and especially in television, and I work with the director that the network wants me to work with. And you can't be negative towards your director. And if your director doesn't share exactly your language, you know, or you find yourself judging them or their skill set, dig deeper. Look at their work, look at their visual references. You have to respect their vision. If you do not respect their vision and their voice, it's going to be a shit show and it's going to fall apart. And the only person that you can blame for that at that point is yourself. You know, you have to, you know, any kind of, so I'd say the most important thing is respect. And if you don't have that respect, if you don't find that you respect the director that you've been teamed with right off the bat, find a way to find it. Understand why that person was put into that role, because they have always been put in that role for one reason or another. Find the reason, love them, love their work, hear their opinions, hear their vision, because again, filmmaking is a hierarchy, and under the pressures of time, it's efficient to work in a hierarchy where there is an overriding voice, you know, and in television it'll be the showrunner, then the director, and then me as the cinematographer, but I am really working for both of them. I am really there to help both of them translate and put the vision of the show on the screen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's so important. And my favorite is dig deeper.
Dig deeper.
There's always another, there's something you're going to find that you're going to love about them, and you're going to be in close quarters anyway, so get to love them. Exactly. And finally, is there words of advice for, and this doesn't have to be just for students, but for that want to be DPs, like the assistant camera people or the second electric, like them and students, what would you say to do?
I think if you can, get a DSLR and either assume that you treat as a prime. You know, basically what I want to say is get to know your lenses, get to know the space of your lenses, which then comes down to shoot as many pictures as you can. What does the 50 millimeter portrait of your mother look like versus the 35 millimeter portrait of your mother? What is the emotional impact on you of that image, you know? So playing with lenses, shooting as much as possible. And actually, and if you don't have a DSLR, you turned me on to an incredible app that maybe you can follow up with because I don't remember the name, that allows you to turn your iPhone into DSLR, but shoot pictures, shoot things that inspire you, get to know your lenses, you know, work with one focal length for a period of time, then move on to working with another focal length, look at light, observe light, and live your life fearlessly. Because in the end, you know, the intuitive end of cinematography is we can't photograph something that we don't understand at an emotional level. We can't photograph specific emotions or emotionality in a story if we can't draw upon our own internal experiences, you know, and that also comes with time, with growing up, with being a human who engages in the messiness of life.
That's why she's so masterful, audience. Thank you all, and thank you, New York Film Academy, for giving all of us this wonderful opportunity to spend time with Anka Malatynska. And this has been so wonderful and beautiful. And next week, we have guest Stephen Kay and his wife, Parabo. So I don't know them that well, but they're brilliant husband, wife, director, actor team. And thank you all for your questions. Feel free to reach out to the New York Film Academy, liz.hinlein@nyfa.edu, and have a wonderful week.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful week.